Hi, once again, and welcome to Political Dharma with Alan Zundel. It is the evening of Saturday, December 21st, 2024. I am producing this kind of late in the weekend for me. Usually I try to get it out on Saturday or Friday night or Saturday morning, but I am pulling together a lot of thoughts about the previous year's coverage as well as what I'm going to be doing in the coming year. So this will be the last show of this year, 2024, but I will be back shortly after New Year's Day in 2025. Now, the channel, for those of you who have not been following me, is devoted to my thoughts about the economic and political problems in the United States and also how that affects the rest of the world. And in this last year, I've been focusing on a specific part of the problem of our political system, which is the uncompetitive nature of our voting, and how the two major parties have come to dominate the system and have no realistic competition to them, which means they can go off and both of the parties cater to their wealthy donors and people who are influential in the parties rather than responding to the will of the voters. So in this last year, I was covering the presidential campaigns of independent and minor party candidates to see if there would be any significant challenges to the two-party system. And I'm going to give you some of my reflections on that in a moment. And in the meantime, as I cover that, developments coming out of these campaigns, which will result in stories I'll be following in the coming year. Then at the end of the show, I'll also have a few remarks about other things I want to bring into the show in 2025. So let me start, first of all, with the evidence that we have an uncompetitive system. Now, the two major parties had front-running candidates early in the campaigns, that is late in 2023, they had candidates who were not popular. They had high negative favorabilities among the general public, that is Donald Trump and Joe Biden. More people disliked than liked them, and very few voters actually wanted to see them as the major party candidates in the general election. Yet, their political parties pulled a lot of strings to try to make sure these two were the candidates who got selected. Now, in one respect, that came about through the lack of participation in debates. On the Republican side, there were 5 presidential primary debates, and Donald Trump did not participate in any of them, even though there were several candidates vying for the nomination of the party. Instead, he often decided to counter-program against them, such as appearing on the Tucker Carlson show or giving a speech in front of working people and supposedly people who were part of a union. So he didn't want to elevate any of the other candidates by participating in a debate that his participation would bring more national attention to them. So trying to keep them out of the field. Maybe that's a fair tactic, but it's not good for democracy if a candidate doesn't debate with their rivals. That means there is effectively no competition or a slanted playing field, at least. On the Democratic Party side, same thing. Joe Biden didn't participate in any debates with his primary rivals, who were predominantly Dean Phillips, a Democratic congressperson who ran because he said, I couldn't find anybody else to run, and I think Joe Biden's not up to the task anymore. He's too old for this. And then Marianne Williamson, the popular author on spirituality, they were running against Biden, and they had occasions to, I think, debate against each other, but Joe Biden didn't participate. And there we see the reason why. Not only he didn't want to elevate them on a national platform, but he really wasn't up to the task of debating, as we saw in his first debate with Donald Trump, when he did so badly that his party finally decided they're going to find a way to push him out and bring in somebody else, which, by the way, is another sign of the anti-democratic nature of the Democratic Party, that they selected a candidate who didn't run in the primaries at all, didn't get a single primary vote for president in her life, Kamala Harris. That is, the vice president. Maybe it makes some sense because she's got a national profile, but not the most popular candidate in the party either, I don't think. At least at the time they chose her, she wasn't. So let me point to a couple of other stories that illustrate this point that our system has, the parties have tried to rig it even internally to tamp down competition to their preferred candidates. We have 2 examples, especially egregious examples here for each candidate. You may remember these stories from when I first covered them. This is from Nevada. And in Nevada, the Republican Party held not only a primary, but a caucus as well. And the reason for that was that Nikki Haley, who was at that time the leading opponent to Donald Trump, was on the ballot in the primary, but Donald Trump refused to participate in the primary. And the Republican Party in Nevada, decided to hold caucuses to actually choose their delegates. And guess what? They said Nikki Haley was disqualified from the caucuses because she didn't apply early enough. So they awarded their delegates to Donald Trump, even though Nikki Haley won the primary in that state. So they, made sure that Trump was going to win in that case. And then in California, another leading example of several that I could have mentioned, California Republicans, they had a system in which candidates who did well in particular congressional districts would get some delegates to the national convention. Well, this year they decided they were going to change this system to a more winner-take-all system. So if anyone, read Donald Trump, got more than a majority votes or better, they would get all the delegates from that state. And of course, California being such a high population state was sending a lot of delegates to the Republican convention. This ensured that there were going to be few candidates for any rivals to Donald Trump, and that Donald Trump would be way ahead. Joe Biden, on the other side, Democratic Party, same thing. Very early on in the process, in fact, early in 2023, they rigged the primary calendar, tried to change it from its traditional order of which states held primaries and caucuses. They tried to move New Hampshire later, and the reason for that is New Hampshire is a small state that traditionally has welcomed challenges to the leading candidates, especially an incumbent president. It was an opportunity for a candidate to travel around a small state and get support and show that they were a viable candidate against the, whoever the front runner was. So they didn't want that. They didn't want to create a springboard for Dean Phillips or anybody else to come in and show that they could compete with Joe Biden. So they tried to move it back in the calendar, but New Hampshire said their constitution wouldn't let them do that. So what they did is they said, well, they could go ahead and hold their primary, but we weren't going to award any delegates till later on, of course, when Joe Biden was already in the cat's seat as far as getting the nomination. So that was one. Another one here was in Florida, where the Democratic Party, this article is from, where is this from? This is an opinion piece, I think. An opinion piece, yeah, in the Independent Florida Alligator, whatever that is. I found it online. The Democratic Party in Florida canceled their primary, saying, well, Joe Biden's going to be our only candidate. We're going to send all of our delegates to him. So they just said, well, we don't need one because he's really the only candidate. The other ones, let's not even think about them or mention their name. And there was, some unhappiness within Democratic circles about the fact that they were pulling the wagons around Joe Biden and not really giving anyone else a fair shot to show that they could build support. All right, so much for the major parties. You probably already know the major parties are not very democratic. They not only protect a system that advantages the two parties, but internally they're becoming less and less democratic, trying to pull strings to make sure their favored candidates win, and nobody else can really present a challenge against them. Now, as far as the other candidates go, the alternative candidates, the leading candidate at first looked like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. He started out in the Democratic primaries, but he soon, in October 2023, turned to being an independent candidate, in part because he saw how the Democrats were rigging the system against him or anybody else. So he became an independent candidate. Early on in the process, he had polling in the double digits and very high favorability, especially compared to the Democratic and Republican frontrunners. So he seemed like he was doing well on his road to presenting a major challenge to the two parties. But as time went on, that wore off a little bit for a variety of reasons. For one, relentless media attacks on him that were not always very fair. For another one, they kept him off the debate stage for the first presidential election. Another one is that the Democratic Party had their allies present a lot of legal challenges to Kennedy getting on the ballot or being able to stay on the ballot. If he did get on the ballot, get enough signatures. So he had to deal with all these court cases trying to keep him from getting on the ballot in various states. And then, of course, as you get closer to the election, in the election year, a lot of folks that were considering third party or independent candidates are going to start migrating back to the major parties because they see that as the only game in town. And so all those combined onslaughts made Kennedy change his mind, I think, in August of this year, and decided he was going to support Trump. And that paid off in a sense because Trump won the election and has now nominated Kennedy to be the head of the Department of Health and Human Services for the federal government. Kennedy actually did pretty well in the presidential vote, given that he had removed his name from a lot of ballots. I think he was on just over half the ballots, and also dropped out of the race, said he wasn't going to be a candidate and vote for Donald Trump instead. Here's from Wikipedia, a summary of the votes. And you see that Kennedy came in fourth after Donald Trump, Kamala Harris, and Jill Stein of the Green Party. So Kennedy got about 756,000 votes, which, if you compare it to Kamala Harris, is about 1% of her votes. Not very high in absolute terms, but in terms of independent or minor party candidates, not too bad for someone who dropped out of the race. Nowhere near what Ross Perot, for example, got back, 19% in 1992. But Kennedy did still come in fourth. Now, is he going to do well with his bid to be the head of Human Services? Well, I think so. Already, let me show you a schedule of events here. Now, just this week, on December 17th, the electors of the Electoral College voted in the various states for the president. As far as I know, none of them were the so-called faithless electors who are not going to vote for their pledged candidates. So Donald Trump should be winning the election outright when they count those votes. On January 3rd, the new Congress is sworn in. That is, all the people in the House of Representatives who just won election or re-election, and a third of the Senate who were just either won re-election or won a seat for the first time. That Congress is going to be sworn in and start to take official actions because they already know who Trump is nominating for certain positions. Kennedy can go around and talk to senators that he knows will be on the committees considering him, such as the Finance Committee is the leading one, and he already knows which senators will be voting for him, which senators will be there in the new Congress. So he's going around talking to them at this time, but they can't take any official actions until the new Congress is sworn in on January 3rd. After that date, they can start to form their official committees and hold hearings and invite Kennedy to talk before the committees instead of just talking to senators privately. And on January 6th, that date that will last into infamy, the Congress counts the electoral votes. And then a couple of weeks later, on January 20th, President Donald Trump will be sworn into office yet again. And it's at that point, when he becomes president, that the nomination is official. He'll be submitting it officially to the U.S. Senate. And because they've done some advance work, presumably, in considering nominations like Kennedy's, they may be able to send this to the full floor of the Senate very rapidly. If there's a lot of controversy, though, it might be slowed up. Now, I do think Kennedy's going to get through this process pretty easily, though, because usually president's nominees do pass the Senate, even though the opposition party might give them a hard time in the hearings and ask a lot of inconvenient or embarrassing questions. But the reason I think he'll do well, let's look at a couple of stories that came out just recently. This is from Politico, published on December 17th, so not too many days previous to today. The headline is "The Really Sticky Situation Facing the Public Health Establishment, RFK Jr." And what the article is about is how the members of the so-called public health establishment, that is, public health researchers in big universities and research centers, and the public health officials in the federal government and in the state governments, have mixed feelings about Kennedy. They actually like a big part of what he's saying. They'd like to see better nutrition in food, so, regenerative agriculture. They think that's a good idea. Addressing the chronic illness epidemic and the epidemic of obesity in the United States, and trying to get better food and better medical products into the hands of consumers. So all that they actually support, but they're concerned about his supposed anti-vax sentiments, and that gives them mixed feelings. So they're not united against him. They actually like part of his program and don't like other parts of the program. See, he may be able to persuade him that he is not that much a threat on some fronts, and they already agree with him on others. And a similar story from Politico. This is just from 2 days ago, December 19th. It says, Senate Republicans launch Make America Healthy Again caucus. Some of the senators have decided to form a caucus to support Kennedy's program, the same part of the program that the public health officials like, the one having to do with, better nutrition and addressing chronic illness and that kind of stuff. So he already has a group supporting him. Again, they're skeptical about his skepticism about vaccines. There's some hesitation there, at least on the part of some of them. But he already has a cheering section supporting a big part of his program in the U.S. Senate. There, I would say the combination of these things, the fact that presidents often get their way, and that there's already been controversial nominations that have bit the dust, like Matt Gaetz, and there might be others before they get around to considering Kennedy, that there'll be more sentiment. Well, we need to give in to the choices of the president at some point, so maybe Kennedy will be the one. I think actually he will. I think he'll get into this. Now, already he's being attacked in the media, and I've seen this recent onslaught of things associating him with trying to ban the polio vaccines, all kind of memes on social media, such as photographs from the 1940s or 50s of children suffering with polio and other contagious diseases, and associating that with Kennedy. Now, this story about the polio vaccines came out of the work of Kennedy's attorney, who wasn't actually working for Kennedy at the time he got involved in this particular thing. Now, this lawyer wrote a op-ed for the Wall Street Journal in which he explained what was going on there. So let me put that up here so you can see it. If you're watching this, the headline the title is RFK Polio Vaccines, the Media and Me. And it says underneath, the media has distorted my legal work on behalf of clients. My only interest is ensuring medications are safe. And he goes on to say that what happened here is that it was a different client that had engaged him in challenging the Food and Drug Administration of the federal government to do more careful testing of one of 6 polio vaccines, just one. And the reason was they thought that this testing hadn't been done properly up to the sufficient standard. There was actually no control group in the testing of this vaccine. And the lawyer said he never discussed this with Kennedy, and it had nothing to do with Kennedy. So he wasn't actually trying to ban the polio vaccine. He was asking for better testing of this. Now, I don't think in this case this had anything to do with the Democratic Party, although, of course, they're going to oppose Kennedy and try to give him a hard time in questioning him at hearings. I think it's coming from the pharmaceutical companies. They probably dug up this story, distorted it, and presented it in a way that it would hit the papers trying to make Kennedy look, again, like some kind of anti-vax extremist, which, depending on your point of view, he may or may not be. But he was not trying to ban polio vaccines. That is one of many misinformation pieces that have been rolled out against him. So I have no evidence that it was the pharmaceutical evidence. This is just a wild hunch on my part. So let's turn to Kennedy, to the candidate who actually did come in third in this election, and that was Jill Stein of the Green Party. And once again, here is the results as presented on the Wikimedia website. Jill Stein came in third with 861,141 votes, and I don't think that includes all the write-in votes. That was about 0.5%, a little over 0.5% of the total popular vote, and of course, no electoral votes at all. But she did come in third, which the Green Party hasn't done in several election cycles. Usually the Libertarian Party did, and this time the Libertarian Party came in 5th after Trump, Harris, Stein, Kennedy. 5th place for the Libertarian Party, which is not too good. So what has been coming out of this Jill Stein campaign for the presidency? Well, one thing is that her vice presidential candidate, Butch Ware of California, says he's going to run for governor of California in 2026. Butch is not his legal name. His name is Rudolph, which I assume as a child, every time Christmas rolled around, he regretted the name Rudolph, and that's why he probably goes by the name Butch. I don't know. That's just a guess on my part once again. But that's one thing coming out of this. So it elevated Butch Ware in the eyes of the Green Party, and he's going to run for governor of California. That is one thing. Another thing is that you may remember I covered this story that the presidential candidate of the Party of Socialism and Liberation, which is a fairly small party, but came in somewhere around seventh place, I think, of the presidential candidates, seventh or eighth, something like that. Just before the election, their candidate, Claudia de la Cruz, made an agreement with Jill Stein. They had also made one with Cornel West, but he didn't do very well at all in this election. Made an agreement to help each other. Wherever one was not on the ballot, but the other one was, the one who was not on the ballot would ask their supporters to vote for the one who was. So they made this agreement to try to help one another in the presidential race and said that they're going to try to find ways to work together in the future. Now, they have already decided that they're going to work together in this protest that the Party of Socialism and Liberation is scheduled for Inauguration Day, January 20th, when they're going to march on Washington, D.C. and hold various rallies and events in other cities and places around the country, protesting the inauguration of Trump and supporting women's rights, workers' rights, and anti-war things, all that kind of stuff. It's called We Fight Back. Jill Stein will be there. She's endorsed this, and she's going to be at the Washington rally. And so we will see. They're going to be working together to some extent, and we'll see how far that goes as 2025 rolls on. Another way that there was cooperation on the economic left, the socialist left, was that Kshama Sawant, formerly of the Socialist Alternative in Washington State, who was elected to the city council in Seattle and made a big impact there. I think raising the minimum wage and a few other important measures that got through the city council. She has formed an organization called Workers Strike Back. I think she left Socialist Alternative Party and has been talking about forming a new party. Now, she did support Jill Stein in this election. She gave her endorsement in Seattle in October. She gave a speech, and at the end of that speech, she mentioned both Jill Stein and the idea of having a new party. So here's the remarks she made at the end of that.
As the Biden-Harris administration did with the railroad workers, no strike-breaking candidate deserves working-class votes. We need a new mass party for the working class, a new anti-war party. And the Green Party, Workers Strike Back, Abandon Harris, the Revolutionary Blackout Network, all of us need to be part of this new party. As a step towards that new party, let's focus on getting out the vote for Jill Stein through November 5th. Then we can come together and take stock of where we are and get back to building a stronger movement against the billionaire class. As Joan said, Workers Strike Back is organizing a conference to take forward the momentum from this campaign and build the fight against whichever warmonger is in the White House.
And indeed, they have been moving forward with their organizing for this event. In February, on February 22nd of next year, they're going to be holding an event, including Jill Stein and also Chris Hedges, the journalist who was a supporter of Cornel West early in this presidential cycle when he was running with the Green Party. Anyway, there's cooperation going forward between Kshama Sawant and Jill Stein, and they're going to be holding a host of events leading up to this and coming out of that. So this is sponsored by Sawant's organization, Workers Strike Back, not to be confused with We Strike Back, the event being sponsored by the Party of Socialism and Liberation. But again, it shows that leading figures on the left are trying to pull their various organizations closer together, and I think in hopes of forming a larger party that can challenge the Democrats on their ground of being supposedly the party on the left, which in my eyes they are not in terms of supporting workers. All right, so we see coming out of the Stein campaign, a lot of people on the left are trying to pull together to create some kind of bigger coalition or party that can have a united front in the upcoming presidential election 4 years from now. So I'll be following those events closely as well. Now, as for the Libertarian Party, as I said, they did poorly this time compared to their previous years, and that was largely because of internal dissension and factionalization. The only story I have, because I've been covering this for a while now, but the one story I have from this week is that their national committee, this is from the Third Party Watch website, article by George Feliz. The Libertarian National Committee submitted amended figures to the Federal Elections Commission. And as he notes here, debts and obligations are now reported to be $57,320, but cash on hand is only $36,597. In other words, the Libertarian Party's National Committee is about $20,000 in the hole. One more sign other parties decline due to this internal factionalization. There was an interesting poll by Fairvote regarding third-party voters. Fairvote is the leading organization promoting ranked choice voting. They commissioned a professional polling firm, Lake Research Partners, to do a study of third-party voters. And there was a couple of interesting things coming out of this that I wanted to bring to your attention. If you see down there some highlighted bullet points, they asked the third-party voters if they had to choose between Trump and Harris, who would they pick? And a majority, 55%, picked Donald Trump. That's kind of surprising because you would expect with all these Stein voters, they would probably lean toward the left and pick Kamala Harris. I think the big reason they did not was because they are still protesting the Democratic parties, especially Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, their position on supporting Israel, no matter how horrible their campaign against the Palestinians in Gaza has been. So I think that was a lot behind what they were doing. And here it says, in part, the reason was expressing intense displeasure with the status quo by punishing the governing party, which would be, at this time, the Democrats rather than the Republicans. It said that 2/3 of Stein voters, 67%, would pick Trump, compared to 21% who would pick Harris. And that's unexpected. But again, I think it's explained by the position on Gaza and how prominent that was in the mind of a lot of Stein voters. And just 9% say they would not have voted. I actually think there would be a higher percentage who would not have voted if they didn't have any alternatives besides Trump and Harris. Similarly, 60% of Kennedy voters would pick Trump. That's not too surprising, considering that Kennedy did endorse Trump. And then finally, Oliver voters who voted for Libertarian Party candidate Chase Oliver, 36% said Trump, which is pretty low because usually the Libertarian Party is closer to Republicans. But I think because of all these problems within the party, one faction wanting to get closer to Trump and another faction not and supporting Chase Oliver, I think that's why they didn't have a lot going in that way. The Libertarian Party members who would have supported Trump did vote for Trump instead of voting for their official nominee. So it says 31% would have picked Harris, and more than 1 in 4, 27% said they would not have voted before. And I think that's closer to the truth for all these, that a lot of them would not have voted at all if they didn't have anyone other than Trump or Harris to pick. Another interesting one, a story that came out recently, was that the United Independent Organization, which is an organization that promotes independent candidacies and tries to represent the interest of independent voters, said that they're launching this Operation Phoenix, which would be an initiative to unite several third parties behind a slate of congressional candidates in 2026. Now, the parties that they already say they have involved in this would be Libertarian Party, the Green Party, and the Forward Party, which was founded by Andrew Yang, a former candidate for the Democratic presidential primaries for the presidential nomination in 2020. He didn't last too long, but he formed his own party because he got disgusted with the Democrats. So they're all going to be working together, apparently. This is from articles from December 11th. And then just yesterday, let me see if I got the date right. Yeah, December 20th, there was another article. Both of these articles are from the Independent Political Report by Jordan Willow Evans. It says that former Kennedy campaign leaders have also have also gotten engaged in this Operation Phoenix to help support independent candidates for the Congress, for the U.S. Congress in 2026. So interesting events happening there. So there's several things that I'll be following in the coming year. Developments in forces on the left trying to organize, and forces among independent forces, that is independent voters and others, trying to get organized. And also I've been talking about my own project to create a third party that would include all independents and all third party candidates and allow voters to endorse or nominate from them, excluding the major party candidates. So I'll be talking more about that and helping those of you who want to get started in your states to form something like this. I'll be presenting suggestions. And if you're interested in doing this in your state, that is helping me form this kind of a party, just email me at Alan, A-L-A-N, at politicaldharma.com, and we'll get you started. And also come back on January to watch my show as I go forward. Also, I'll be talking a little bit about the kind of pseudo party I want to form. I have my own views on things that I'll be explaining as the year wears on about what's going on in the world economy, in the United States economy, and our political system and polarization and the declining fortunes of the majority of the population. I'm going to explain more my views about that. And the program that I'd like to see to address that, I'm calling it a libertarian socialist program because it's probably closer to that tradition, which few people know about anyway. But it's my peculiar take on that tradition. I'll be talking about that somewhat, but rather than create a separate party, which would just be marginalized like the other parties, I also want to try to join forces with other parties in some kind of larger organization that's neutral between all these parties. Just let them compete against each other and see how well they do and promote their common agendas against the two major parties. Try to open it up to more competition. That, and I'll be doing more interviews with folks in areas that pertain to the interests of me and my followers, hopefully. And that's it. I am now, my videos have been appearing on YouTube and Rumble and Spotify, where you can find it in video and audio versions. Also, you can find the audio versions in Apple Podcasts and other podcast platforms. I've also opened accounts for Political Dharma on Instagram and Blue Sky. So if you're in those, on those social media things, check out Political Dharma, follow it. Maybe in the next 2 weeks, I'll be posting a few things there, not long form videos, but random thoughts or whatever I come up with. So thanks again for watching, and I'll be here with you again in January. Bye.